And then we complain about, okay, this isn't changing. Okay, how you gonna change it? Instead of complaining about what somebody else isn't doing, how about you bring it to the forefront? You change it. So that was a big deal for me, just changing my day to day, booking that. I remember I was on one of my first solo trips, bro. I was petrified to go to. So and it's this
Where'd you
thing,
go?
man. I think I went. What was my first solo, bro? I've been on so many,
Solo trips are
bro.
you learn so much about yourself being
Bro.
out in a different city by yourself, and you're like
But
the
it's
only person
so
to rely on.
scary before your first one, you're booking your own plane ticket. You don't have the friends to rely on to give you the energy of like, all right, where we going? What we doing? No, you got to do all that yourself. And you got to motivate yourself to get up and do it and handle all the paperwork and this and booking all this stuff. But when I finally did it, it's such an accomplishment, even though that seems so small in the grand scheme of things. But for a personal achievement, it was huge. Because I literally remember, I can't remember what city it was. It might have just been like Chicago or something. Like something super around the corner. But I would just remember like sitting in the hotel like oh shit, like I'm here. Like I done did this. Like I'm by myself. But then I was just like, all right, now what do I do? Like how do I experience the city? How do I move around? How do I meet people? And it was literally that. I would just go out, walk all around downtown, stop in the bars, stop in the clubs, stop in the restaurants, stop in the clothing stores, and just meet a whole bunch of people. And I've never, like I said earlier, I've never been a shy person. Like I'll talk to anybody and everybody. So that's always built me connections in different cities. So that's where literally, and the more I did that, the more I would come back to my old situation and be like, I got it. This ain't it. I would feel even more miserable.
I feel like traveling gives you that feeling of or like the people, it sets you apart from the people who don't travel, because once you come back, like you're in that zone of like talking to people, exploring new things, like wondering what the world's about. And like when you're in a new city, you don't know anything. So like it's almost like being a kid again. You know what I mean? Like everything you see is new to you. So you're like, what's this? Like, what's that? Like, what happens if we run down these stairs? Like, what happens if we take a picture of this?
Yeah.
Whereas like it can be so easy to get stuck just thinking about the stuff you want to do when you're in a place that's so familiar. So without getting out of your hometown or without traveling at all, I think it's just much easier to get stuck in that like repetitive cycle of like thoughts, and you just think the same exact thoughts every single day.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that traveling, in my experience,
Yeah, I was about to say, did you grow up traveling?
Yeah, so I always traveled a lot because my mom was always a big traveler. So she was always taking me to Florida. We'd always go to South Carolina, Vermont. We were always kind of going somewhere. So I mean, I kept that growing up, and like I always like. I think my first solo trip was like I was like 18 years old, and I drove down to North Carolina.
So dope to me, man.
To go like visit some chick at like this college I knew.
But that's really, and that's what I admire. Like,
well, I think that's why I'm able to be 24 in this situation
and just go.
As I started exploring, and actually, I was actually just talking to somebody about this yesterday. How I feel like I was almost on my own since I was 14. Like not because my parents weren't there for me. It's just because like I was like a really independent kid, and I bought a bicycle when I was 14, and like since then I was gone.
Bro, that's huge.
You know what I mean? Like I would ride my bike 15 miles to like the next city, like in Columbus. Like I'd ride Bexley and like hang out with people out there, and like just meet new people, like go do new stuff, and like see like new things.
And you really realize your freedom of your mind. Like, oh, like when you put your body in a new space, you just like, that's real freedom. I can move
and
anytime that I want.
It proves to yourself that you're capable of doing so much more than you think. You know what I mean? Because like these things that you think of doing, going on a trip, going to LA, going to booking yourself a flight, like they seem impossible. And I mean, like when you're living in the future, when you're not living in the present, and you're like just thinking about it, it can get overwhelming. And I think most people get stuck. 90% of people get stuck there. The thinking part.
And it's the thinking and not taking action. And you scare yourself out of like the most little, and that's I remember going through all those fears of like, what happens if this, and what happens if I don't, what happens if I get lost, what happens if, it's just like, you'll be all right.
And you were saying that, I was thinking too, like, and that fear of anxiety and that fear that you get when you're like doing those first things, it's the same fear that comes up in a lot of different situations and scenarios in life. And I think that like,
that's a fact.
Realizing that when that fear comes up and being able to notice that fear in yourself, and instead of like acting from the fear, like you attack it, like that's what people say, like the life you want is on the other side of your comfort zone. Like that's exactly what they're talking